Casa de Shampoo. And how are you this morning? Ooh. The fog's so sucked in you can't even see anything. This morning the fog was sucked in all the way up the hill. Now it's starting to pull back towards the beach. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my battle box, stash box I made yesterday, or this weekend, I should say. It took a couple days. Okay, so I had to go out to thrift stores and find things, first a box, and things that fit in the box, and I had to go to the hardware store. Okay, so here's the box, which you can see I made the feet crooked, but there I did it. So here's my box. Okay. So it had this image of a woman holding a child, right? And I took that. Well, I mean, I just pasted it. I said I don't like that. And then the bottom was cardboard. So I screwed in this tin tea tray to the bottom to make the bottom, because it was a perfect size. So it'll open her up. Oh, and I did a lock, so it won't open when I bring it out here, put it in my purse or something, because I want something that's like a little table I can work at with my stuff instead of having it freaking rely on other uneven surfaces, I guess is the way to put it. Okay, so here's the inside. It's a jewelry box that I face up. So I screwed in this cheapy 99-cent wallet. This is where I'm putting my papers, right? Put a sign, 420 somewhere. Right, and then this is the inside, where I can put my stuff, and it makes a nice clean surface. My brother was saying I should make I'm clumsy. My butt's getting wet out here. Okay, so I did this, and then what I did was I bought this nice little tiny ashtray, and I made me a little hemp wick holder, and a nice little tray that fits right inside, and I can put right on top, and it fits perfect in that little spot. What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is wrong with you? Whoa, stay. What the hell is wrong with this thing? Anyway, this is a slanty shanty. That's what I'm saying. You can't depend on other flat surfaces. They are unreliable. Okay, and then this little jarring around so it's easy to get out. And this is my little taster kit I did last night for fun. So I hot glued in some wood in this little jar, and then this is actually dog are a little bit mental. No offense, but now that I'm retired and I'm watching you, when I get up in the morning, I'm watching you drive and stuff, I can see you're a little bit stressed. There's a little mentalness going on there. I am watching this woman rush down the hill with her blonde hair and her nurse's uniform trying to get to work and on her shift on time. Yeah, there's a little mentality. I mean, it has to be this way, but I just think all that stress. Well, hopefully she's saving somebody's life. Don't go out of line. I don't need it. It is God this sensors. It's good. Gave that one to my brothers to try, and immediately they're doing the same thing I am. They're sucking the flame right down. And then sitting there trying to use a coal and the thing. And I'm like, no, you gotta back it off, but you can't be just full on hitting it or I'll just put the thing right out, man. So let's take a look at some of this morning that I'm enjoying here. This chair's wet. Everything's wet. Oh my goodness. Get that thing off there. It's too soaked. Oh, my butt's cold. I want you to look at this T-Town Tim. You're not the only one with spots in the backyard, pal, made out of shit. Here's what I have to say about this. Why are you spending money on fucking lawn furniture? It's beautiful. It costs $1,000, $500. Beautiful teak lawn furniture you put in your backyard and rots. I have spent so much money on nice furniture and it just rots. Some of it is still in the yard. These white chairs weren't a small penny to pay, you know, because they're like antique-y metal white chairs. Well, they rot. Every umbrella I've ever had rots. So I think building things for the winter or summer in your yard out of something that isn't worth $20 is a waste of money. Because it's just gonna rot unless you have something to cover it with or do something. Alright. So let's get to the news portion here. Let's recap. As we all know, last week the DEA came out with a very crazy ruling that marijuana was equivalent with heroin. However, they did supposedly allow more marijuana to be grown and made available for testing. Now, whether or not this testing actually takes place, we'll have to see, and who it's done by and for what reasons. We'll have to see what that is, but this is what they've ruled. Now, I would argue that they knew they were fucked here, that the minute they were going to say that it was equivalent with heroin, they were screwed. Because even the President of the United States has said that it is not equivalent with heroin or alcohol. And even sugar, if you really look at the statistics of people who have died of things like sugar, caffeine, you know. Okay. Speaking of which. Plus coffee cups. Why spend money at like a store for coffee cups? Here is Epcot Center, right? Beautiful Epcot Center. I got 2 of them. Thrift store. 95 cents. Let somebody else go to Epcot and fuck with that and pick up the souvenir that they're going to bring me and sell me for $1. I just got to wait till they're done using it, you know. To me, this is reason. Why? I mean, it looks nice. It's for show. It makes people feel good. But then it rots in the sun. And then I think if people had a brain, they wouldn't feel good about that. They'd be like, look, you spent all that money on that plastic shit in your yard, and now it is in the trash. Like, 6 months later, that is stupidity, not, ooh, cool, you know. Paint it, I guess, if you have a real problem with it. But me, I just build shit out of crap, because you need some place to sit in the sun, or out of the sun here, because in the summer, the sun can bake through these front windows and stuff and just turn this whole yard into a desert. It's amazing. I have to really fight to keep the sun from beating the shit out of my hillside. Otherwise, my backyard right now is an absolute desert. I let it go all summer because of the drought. Usually I would do both yards, and I just said, okay, you guys, sorry, you're going to have to just eat shit this summer, because, you know, the drought, you can't be watering everything, you know. Oh, look at what you're doing here, Kelly. Okay, so first story we're going to talk about actually has to do with the DEA, and it's basically that this is just a recap, that there's 9 states looking at some form of legalization, and the DEA just made this ridiculous rule. Three, two, one. Oh. Washington Times. WashingtonTimes.com, marijuana initiative on ballot in record 9 states despite Fed's firm stand. At least 9 states will charge ahead with marijuana initiatives on ballots in November, a record number despite the federal government's decision not to loosen restrictions on the drug, underscores the precariousness of any type of legal recognition. In 5 states, California, Arizona, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Maine, voters will be asked whether they want to legalize recreational use of marijuana. Meanwhile, those in Florida, Arkansas, and North Dakota will vote on starting full-fledged medical marijuana programs. The Montana voters will decide whether to loosen restrictions on their state's existing programs.
Voters in Missouri, Michigan, and Oklahoma could see medical marijuana initiatives on the ballot November 8th. If supporters produce enough petition signatures, initiative supporters in Missouri and Michigan are embroiled in a court battle over signatures that were thrown out and left them short of the threshold required. Officials in Oklahoma are counting signatures turned in Thursday. Paul Armenetano, deputy director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Law, said that the number of states voting on marijuana initiatives is unprecedented. I think that speaks to both the public support for the issue and the maturation of campaigns behind reforming marijuana laws, Mr. Armenetto said. Voters in several of the states with marijuana initiatives have defeated previous measures. Legalization proponents say each election cycle with marijuana on the ballot has given advocates more experience with ballot language and generated more enthusiasm for their campaigns. 4 states and the District of Columbia have legalized recreational use of marijuana through voter referendum, and 25 states have approved medical marijuana programs. The Drug Enforcement Administration last week denied requests to change the legal classification of marijuana. It's classified as Schedule I drug, alongside heroin and LSD, shooting down advocates' push to get the drug federally approved for medical purposes. But drug reform advocates say approval of the ballot initiative this year could produce enough momentum on marijuana reform to change that in the coming years. If we win, it's really going to accelerate our ability to change federal law, said Tom Angel, chairman of the Marijuana Majority. A win in California, the most populous state in the nation, would mean an additional 53 House members would represent districts in a state with a legislative interest in reforming marijuana that hinders the marijuana industry, he said. We really could start to win a lot more victories on the federal level in 2017 because of what happens, Mr. Angel said. The legalization movement has received unlikely support from lawmakers who haven't necessarily been in favor of making the drug available for recreational use, but who want to remove barriers for the industry now that it's functional, said Mason Tevert, Director of Communications for the Marijuana Policy Project, which is supporting ballot initiative efforts in several states. Though enthusiasm may be high, initiatives in a host of states are still far from achieving slam dunks.
Glasses do not buy my girlfriend.
But not better.
In achieving slam dunks. So much HTML. All right, back to where I was. Okay, they're far from achieving slam dunks. In Arizona, a July poll from OH Predictive Insight showed an initiative to legalize marijuana was likely to lose, with 52.5% of likely voters surveyed saying they would vote against legalizing recreational marijuana, while 39.1% said they would vote in favor. Part of the opposition to the initiative stems from another group that had sought to legalize recreational use of marijuana drug this year. Two competing marijuana initiatives divided supporters. The only one was able to gather signatures needed to make the ballot. The campaign that was unable to qualify for the ballot has launched a new effort. Marijuana consumers against fake marijuana legalization to defeat Proposition 205. They argued that the initiative would do more harm than good by not adequately reforming marijuana laws. For instance, by leaving in place felony charges for those who possess more than the legal amount of marijuana, or by allowing city or county governments to ban more growth of marijuana if it becomes a nuisance. They have asked voters to reject the 2016 ballot proposal and to support the 2018 legalization campaign that they say would include additional protections. Arizona officials said the Proposition 15 percent tax on proposed 15% tax on retail marijuana sales would generate more than $123 million in revenue and licensing fees by 2020. J.P. Hallock, chairman of the Yes on 205 campaign, said that the initiative would end a disastrous policy of marijuana prohibition. Prop 205 would establish a more sensible system in which marijuana is regulated and taxed similarly to alcohol, Mr. Hollerock said in a statement issued last week. In Florida, with the state's first medical pot shops in Tallahassee made its first sale of low-dose non-euphoric strains of marijuana in July, activists are gearing up for the ballot initiative that would allow strains with higher potency to be sold and would expand the types of illnesses for which it could be prescribed. A similar effort failed in 2014, receiving 57% of the vote, shy of the 60% required to pass. By a Quinnipiac University poll from May showed that 80% of the voters would support the Florida ballot measure, and a local TV news station poll from the end of June showed support at 68%. Support for legalization in more evenly divided in other states such as Maine and Massachusetts, where polls show opposition to the ballot initiative runs at about 41% to 51% respectively. Losses in states could be regarded as a step backward for the movement, particularly in California, if California rejected the legalization initiative by a larger margin than when the issue was on the ballot in 2012, Mr. Tevert said. But losses are likely to only reinvigorate activists, he said. Several states that have the issue up for the vote this year have rejected either legalization or medical marijuana initiatives. In others where the issue is up, the voters for the first time, just getting the issue on the ballot is regarded as a stepping stone that often brings together support to rally for the next try. It's not like your lost ground, Mr. Tevert said, when you take away the bitterness of losing on election day 354 days out of the year, it's a win. Boy, that was hard to read before the 10 minutes was up. Okay, let's see.
Okay, so now I'm going to tell you kind of where we're at looking at the news this morning. It seems that by, smushing their whole idea of this was going to be advertising for children, has been destroyed. Okay, so because we got a ruling on that court thing, right? So the California news and the national news both got kind of, for the prohibitionist side, got tripped up, right? Because you had this news coming out from the DEA, which is like they, made it, yes, prohibition is still okay because no scientific, and we work on science and all this kind of thing, and that was supposed to be good for their side, but it turned out to be not good. There's a birdie. Oh my God, I wish I could show you what I see right now. Sorry, there's a birdie. Because there's birds, and I don't want to scare them away. There's like 3 of them. Yes, hello. I'm not gonna do anything. You enjoy. It's okay. I put the seed out for you guys. It's alright. Literally 3 little birds. Bob Marley is with us. Sorry. Scared him. The spirit of Bob Marley is truly with us this day. 3 little birds. Oh, that was so cool. They didn't expect me there. I'm sorry. I should put up something here so I can watch the birds and they can't see me. I need to make some sort of bird blind. I'll have to think of that later. I need a piece of bamboo. Okay, so here's the story about how the ruling went, but I'm going to explain it. What basically happened was they nullified each other, but we still get the bigger win. Okay, so they won this tiny portion of their lawsuit, and that is this. They claim that if marijuana is legalized, that children will be exposed to advertising on television promoting marijuana usage, particularly smoking. And the Proposition 64 side says, no, that's not true. We have stipulations in place that if at any time the federal government lifts their prohibition on marijuana, and that would open up the possibility of advertisements, we have these restrictions so that only advertisements will air like late at night, like 2 o'clock in the morning or something, like when the Miss Cleo ads used to air, or the phone sex hotline or something like that. Adult Swim, you know what I mean? So that would infer that a small portion of their assertion is true, that if the federal government were to legalize marijuana, then it would become available for advertising. Then Proposition 64 would kick in, that would give a small provision to allow advertisements in the majority adult, markets. Okay, if your kid's watching adult films, that's kind of on you. They're not supposed to be doing that. So if Dianne Feinstein's children are going to be watching shows that are 97% adult, or whatever the provision is in Prop 64, then that's pretty much more about your bad parenting. It's a different issue, and not really, there's, they have Budweiser commercials and stuff during the Super Bowl, and there are a lot of children watching that. And I'm sorry, alcohol is far more dangerous. Their families are going to be far more impacted by alcohol on that day than by marijuana. So here's to that video. Okay, so my last video is PBS just came out this morning with an article about and exactly what happened here in Ventura. Here in Ventura, the hospital, which is just down the hill from me, Community Memorial Hospital, invited the police chief, Ken Corney, who's one of the spokesmen for the anti-side for the Police Association in California, invited him to a meeting where they were going to discuss the efficacy of medical marijuana. And basically the doctor's point of view was that we don't have any research on this, and we need to have research, and this is supposedly helping people, and we would love to know if this is actually helping people or not, and we can't do that because of this research. So this was pretty much the whole deal, and Ken Corney came with all the usual blah 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 talking points that the anti-side had, which he's already been pretty much beaten back on lately. But you can find that video at Community Memorial Hospital in Ventura's website in their media section under, I think it's like marijuana, medical marijuana or something like that, but there's a video where there's an entire meeting and you can see the whole thing. So this PBS article kind of goes to the same thing, where doctors are saying because of all of these restricted rules, which still exist, because even though the DEA said they made more marijuana available for testing, where is the inertia that's going to cause this testing? It's still illegal. If you're a doctor dealing with this, you're still going to be looked down on. You're still taking a very expensive career and maybe flushing it down the toilet, depending on where you are and what people's reactions will be. They don't know where the line begins and ends. So people like me are left to, be like the local, swamp witch coming up with local remedies. Because there isn't any regulation. And these guys don't want to have regulation. They want you to wait on regulation. And then the pharmaceutical companies just keep advertising to them or pushing them to keep that regulation from happening. So the FDA is doing much like what they did with sugar. For many years, sugar was not seen as unhealthy because the FDA had a bunch of studies, but they were inconclusive. And trust me, lots of companies that sold sugary treats and later on corn syrup and stuff, paid to make sure that to make sure that tests were run that ended up being inconclusive, so that Kellogg's and all these guys could run advertisements saying it's an important part of your breakfast. No, it isn't. But the tests that would have argued against that for parents were inconclusive thanks to the FDA because they take a little money on the side. And this is going to be the same kind of nonsense. How did we get the food pyramid in the first place? It's a rigged house. You're going to a rigged house and expecting them to protect your life. And it's like, don't be stupid. You have to understand they're only human. Somebody waves a big handful of cash at them, they're going to take it. You can't blame them. Sharks are going to be sharks. You have to be smart and see that this possibility exists and guard against it and not be disrespectful or hateful. Just understand that when corruption is possible, it's going to occur. If you're creating kind of a petri dish, an auger tray for corruption to have a healthy environment to grow because of this prohibition. Well, there it is. And I was noticing something else this morning when I was making tea before I show you this video. In the end of alcohol prohibition, everybody, including my grandfather, had somehow accidentally or on purpose had been part of, you know, the underground black market for alcohol. My grandfather just needed a job, was on a corner with a bunch of guys looking for work, got in a truck to go make a delivery. Next thing, they're in a back alley, some dude's knocking on the door, and a little fucking door opens, and he gives the password, and my grandfather's in the back of the truck, a fucking Lutheran, going, oh shit, I'm a criminal now. Well, now, everybody is a narcotics officer. Your parents are narcotics officers. Your teachers are narcotics officers. Your friends at school are narcotics officers or snitches. Everybody's part of this web of looking over each other's shoulder to make sure that they stay in line. Stay in line with the state. Only use the drugs that we prescribe for you. Mach schnell. You know? Zig Heil. It's creepy. This time the prohibition got creepy. It's not that everybody turned into a gangster. Everybody turned into either a snitch, a spy, or a cop. Everybody thinks they have the right to look down their nose on other people because of what they're doing or who they are. It's super creepy and dystopic this time. Some of these people, and stupid people, not smart people, but I mean stupid people are saying things like, you know, poison their water. You know, some chick that was on this, there's a thing on YouTube to, Triumph, the insult dog, has a political special, and like they had some Trump supporters, supposedly, I'm not sure this is true, and they showed up some fake Trump ads, and this one chick is talking about how you could poison Mexican people's water or Chinese people's water, or give them inoculations that they think are inoculations, but it would actually make them sick. You know, that, and she's just some hillbilly bumpkin. But that's the kind of thinking that literally led to women and men being tied to stakes and burned alive. You know, and then it became a money-making operation because the rich people realized, like the Catholics, realized that if they could get a motherfucker to say he was a witch, you could keep his land, take it from his family. So it became a game. How long can I torture you? Let's see if you give up that you're a witch, because then I take all your property from your family and they're left destitute. But if you hang in there, your family gets to keep everything. And again, even with all of this, you know, property seizure and stuff, it's very much like the witch trials in some ways. It's creepy. I'm sorry, birdies. I keep scaring you away from your food. I'll stop. Okay, so here's that video of the PBS, what the problem that doctors are having.
The rundown, PBS. Why some doctors feel completely in the dark about medical marijuana. Medical marijuana has been legal in Maine for almost 20 years, but Farmington physician Jean Attenucci says she continues to feel unprepared when counseling sick patients about whether the drug could benefit them. Will it help my glaucoma or my chronic pain? My chemotherapy's making me nauseous and nothing helps. Is cannabis the solution? Patients hope that Antonucci, 62, can answer those questions, but she said she is still completely in the dark. Antonucci doesn't know whether marijuana is the right way to treat an ailment, what amounts is an appropriate dose, or whether a patient should smoke it, eat it, rub it through an oil, or vaporize it. Like most doctors, she was never trained to have this discussion, and because the topic still is not usually covered in medical school, seasoned doctors, as well as young ones, often consider themselves ill-equipped. Even though she tries to keep up with the scientific literature, Anna Nochi said, "It's very difficult to support patients but not know what they're saying." As the number of states allowed medical marijuana grows, the total has reached 25 plus, and the District of Columbia. Some are working to address this knowledge gap. With physicians training programs, states are beginning to require doctors to take continuing medical education courses that detail how marijuana interacts with the nervous system and other medications, as well as its side effects. Though through laws, though laws, they have a common theme. Okay, through laws vary, though laws vary, they have a common theme. They usually set up a process by which states establish marijuana dependency, where patients with qualified medical conditions can obtain the drug. The conditions are specific on a state-approved list, and the role of doctors is often to certify that patients have one of these ailments. But many say that without knowing cannabis health effects, even writing a certification makes them uncomfortable. We just don't know what we don't know. And that's a concern, said Wanda Filer, president of the American Academy of Family Physicians and a practicing doctor in Pennsylvania. This medical uncertainty is complicated by confusion over how to navigate other contradictory laws, while states generally involve physicians in the process by which patients obtain marijuana. National drug policies have traditionally had a chilling effect on those conversations. The Federation of States Medical Boards has tried to add clarity. In August 9th, JAMA editorial leading noted that federal law technically prohibits prescribing marijuana, as tasks states that allow it for medical use to implement strong and effective enforcement systems to address any threat those laws could pose to public safety, public health, and other interests. If states' regulations is deemed insufficient, the federal government can step in. That's why many doctors say they feel caught in the middle, not completely sure of where the line is now drawn between legal medical practice and what could get them into trouble. In New York, which legalized marijuana for medical purposes in 2014, the state's health department rolled out a certification program last October. The state's medical marijuana program itself launched in January 2016. The course, which lasts for about 4 hours and costs about $249, is part of a large physician registration process. So far, the state's estimated 656 physicians have completed the required steps. Other steps have contacted New York's Department of Health to learn how the training works. Pennsylvania and Ohio are also developing similar programs. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, doctors who wish to participate in the state's medical marijuana program are required to take courses approved by the American Medical Association. Maryland doesn't require training, but encourages it through its Medical Cannabis Commission website. A policy also followed in some other states. Physicians appear to welcome such direction. A 2013 study in Colorado, for instance, found more than 80% of family doctors thought physicians needed medical training before recommending marijuana. But some advocates worry that doctors may find these requirements onerous and opt out, which would, in turn, thwart patients' access to the now legal therapy, said Ellen Smith, a board member of the U.S. Pain Foundation, which favors expanded access to medical cannabis. Education is essential given the complexity of how marijuana interacts with the body and how little physicians know, said Stephen Korn, an associate professor and anesthesiologist, uh, perioperative and pain medicine at Harvard Medical University. Korn also co-founded the Answer page, a medical information website that provides educational content to the New York program, as well as a similar Florida initiative. The company, one of a few groups to offer teaching and on medical marijuana, is also bidding to supply information for Pennsylvania program, Korn said. You need a multi-hour course to learn where the medical cannabis works within the body, Korn said. As a patient, would you want a doctor blindly recommending something without knowing how it's going to interact with your other medications, what to expect from it and what not to expect? But many say the science is too weak to answer these questions. One reason the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency classifies marijuana as a Schedule I drug, the same level as heroin. This classification makes it more difficult for researchers to gain access to the drug and to gain approval for human subjects to participate in studies. The White House rejected a petition this past week to reclassify the drug in a less strict category, though federal authorities say they will start letting more facilities grow marijuana for the purpose of research. Currently, only the University of Mississippi can produce it, which advocates say limits study. From a medical standpoint, the lack of information is troubling, Filler said. Typically, when we're going to prescribe something, you've got data that shows safety and efficacy, she said. With marijuana, the body of research doesn't match that what many doctors are used to for prescription drugs. Still, Korn said doctors appear pleased with the state's training sessions. More than 80% of the New York doctors who have taken this course said they changed their practices in response to what they learned. But even now, whenever Korn speaks with doctors about medical marijuana, people ask him how they can learn more about the drug's medical properties and about legal risks. Those two concerns, he said, likely reduce the number of doctors comfortable with the willingness to discuss marijuana's place in medicine, even if it is allowed in their state. Though others say the circumstances is starting to ease, doctors like Jan Anagnochi in Maine continue to struggle to figure out how marijuana can fit in safe and compassionate medicine.
We'll try this again. Keep falling over. Okay. So basically, the next story I have is about the lawsuit that was here in California, right? And it was the people that were for Prop 64 were suing the people against because they were saying that this was going to open up advertisement to kids, okay? And then the people that were against Prop 64 sued saying, yes, no, this opens it up so that it's against kids. Well, it turns out that the judge ruled that you can only say that, but they also get to say, in other words, the foresight gets to say this only would impact audience that was like almost 97% adult, which means probably the middle of the night, like pornography time, you know. You know, like people that do those ads for phone sex, when that slot comes on, time slot for that. Oh, that guy, there's just a little bit of breeze, and there we go. It doesn't want to work out here. So basically, yes, if it was legalized federally, then it would make it available to ads. Then it's just not going to work out here. Then, yeah, the provisions in 64 would kick in where it would allow it for a very limited audience. So here's that story.
YesOn64.org. Judge rules overwhelmingly in favor of Yes on 64, states all 6 ballot arguments by opponents false and misleading, orders substantial changes. Court reaffirms that Prop 64's toughest in-nation child protection ban, advertising directed to children, and that nothing in Prop 64 makes it legal to show marijuana ads on TV because federal law prohibits it. Sacramento, California. The Yes on Proposition 64 campaign announced today that a Sacramento Superior Court judge has ruled that official ballot arguments submitted by the measure's opponents cannot contain multiple false and misleading statements, and were therefore ordered modified. View court document here and here. Original line flaw number 4. Rolls back the total prohibition of smoking ads on TV. Judge says false and misleading. Ordered modified. Original line. In short, Proposition 64 is radically different from legalization measures in other states and would repeal countless consumer protections just passed last year and signed into law by Governor Brown. Judge says false and misleading, ordered modified. Number 4, line 4. Why does Proposition 64 exempt marijuana from the ban on smoking commercials on TV? Judge says false and misleading, ordered modified. Original line Proposition 64 in effort overturns a 45-year ban on smoking ads on television, legalizing marijuana ads airing to millions of children and teen viewers. Judge says false and misleading, ordered modified. Original line, these marijuana smoking ads will be legal on all broadcast primetime shows and approximately 95% of all broadcast television programs. Judge says false and misleading, ordered modified. Original line, children will be exposed to ads promoting marijuana gummy candy and brownies. Judge says false and misleading, ordered modified. Judge changed additional reaffirmment. Judge Chang additionally reaffirmed that, Proposition 64's sale of non-medical marijuana will not occur at will only occur, at highly regulated licensed businesses, which only adults 21 and over will be allowed to enter, outright rejecting opponents' arguments. Proposition 64's toughest in the nation protections for children, including banning advertising directly to children, changed from towards children. Nothing in Prop 64 makes it legal to show marijuana ads on TV because federal law prohibits it, outright rejecting opponents' arguments. Today, the opponents of Proposition 64 found out the hard way that the same old tired anti-marijuana propaganda doesn't fly in courts anymore than it does with voters, said Jason Kenney, spokesman for Proposition 64. 6 of the opposition's most egregious ballot statements were challenged in court. All 6 of those statements were explicitly ruled false and misleading by the judge, and specifically modified by comparison. Several of the opponents' responses were either rejected or significantly weakened. As a result of their actions, voters will have more objective, fact-based information in their ballot pamphlets instead of discredited scare tactics from the anti-marijuana browbeaters. This is a clear and decisive victory for a carefully written measure with broad consensus public support, a measure which one major newspaper has already called a thoughtful measure that should be passed. Proposition 64 is a consensus measure based on recognized best practices and recommendations from hundreds of engaged citizens and organizations. It includes strong safeguards for children, workers, local government, and small businesses, and strict anti-monopoly provisions, and the toughest warning labels and marketing to kids law in the nation. It is supported by the California Academy of Preventative Medicine and the California Medical Association, as well as California Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, bipartisan elected officials including Democratic U.S. Representative Ted Lieu and Jared Hoffman, and Republican U.S. Rep. Dana Rohrabacher, and an unprecedented coalition including environmental leaders, business owners, small farmers, civil rights groups, public safety experts, and social justice advocates. Endorse the Adult Use of Marijuana Act.
Such an amazing gig. Okay, so that's my show for Monday. You stay high and goodbye. And I guess Freddie Pritchard's show is coming up, but it's like later, like I think the 24th or something. My husband said he saw an ad for it. So his show's coming. That's great, because that means our community will come back and everybody will have things to say about what happened while they were gone.